OTBAir.ie.
Now, you're welcome back. So, very interesting Carabao Cup semi-final this evening. Let's get team news once again. Peter Smith is with us.
Only two changes for each team. Dean Henderson makes his Old Trafford debut in goal for United. Victor Lindelof is restored, with David De Gea and Eric Bailly dropping down to the bench. City's two alterations see recourse for Riyad Mahrez and Fernandinho, with Rodri and Bernardo Silva joining the available again Jesus and Walker amongst the City substitutes. At Old Trafford, it's Manchester United against Manchester City.
Yeah, it kicks off at 7:45. Miguel Delaney of the London Independent is with us. Happy New Year, Miguel. How you doing?
Happy New Year. Not too bad. Fairly excited about this one.
Yeah, this should be good. Just to pause for a moment, the news from Derby broke this evening. Effectively, they're withdrawing from their FA Cup third round. They'll be sending a team of under-23/under-18s against Chorley. And the news has come through as well. 40 players and club staff have tested positive for coronavirus over the past week in the Premier League. I was looking at some of the figures. They did hit 10 positives, certainly in September. They hit 14 in November as well. But if you take the last 4 weeks of tests, it was 6 across 1 week, middle of December, followed by 7 the next week. They then broke the record with 18 positives last week. And now the news has emerged today. They've hit 40 today. How worrying is this? Are we a couple more weeks of this away from words like exponential being used and this thing teetering and being under pressure? Or are the Premier League happy enough with the situation under the circumstances?
I've had to write a lot about this and chase, but I suppose it's my livelihood that it's connected to, not just the footballers. Again, this situation, like this whole league season, can make fools of any predictions. But for the moment, I actually don't think the figures are that concerning at all. In fact, I have to say, from some of the stories that started last week, when we almost had that kind of cascade of news about Fulham, about Manchester City, it looked like it could go out of control. But I actually think the numbers of just 40 positive cases are quite low relative to the concern and relative to the possible situation. Because I think there were fears that there could be huge numbers. And I think that stands at about almost 2% of the tests. And from everyone you speak to in the Premier League, they're quite comfortable with those numbers. They show that the system is adaptable. And yeah, you're right that these numbers do show a spike from what we've become used to since Project Restart got underway. But then the whole point of this was going to happen at some point, and the system has to show it's adaptable. And I think they do, because there are kind of wider issues here, because ultimately we've come out of we're coming out of the Christmas season when a lot of and we've seen some of the cases with, say, Tottenham Hotspur or Lanzini, where some players have naturally been gathering with family. That's less likely from here on in. And so I think there maybe was an expectation this was going to happen at some point. So it's just about the system adapting, and the Premier League are fully confident that the system can adapt, because ultimately the players or staff, they don't get COVID from playing football or from training or from even kind of travelling together. That's pretty much all the scientific evidence backs it up now, and that's why the Premier League is so confident. It's where they've got COVID is kind of, I suppose, coming out of the bubble, so to speak, or mixing, and the feeling is that given the messages they've had from Public Health England, basically to adhere as strictly as possible to the rules, that we might see this level out, and there is a confidence it won't reach these kind of crisis numbers in football. But the one thing I would say, I do think this could be an FA Cup weekend that will raise alarms, because I've had to write about this for the weekend as well. The FA Cup is the competition. The third round is the weekend that brings all of English football together, all the rest of it. But what it will show this weekend is a huge split in terms of the haves and have-nots in terms of testing, because ultimately, and it is remarkable, this is true, but up until this week, the Premier League was basically the only competition in England that was, or only men's competition that was regularly testing in that way. In the lower leagues in the EFL, there was almost this kind of approach where if players felt something, then they'd get a test, but there wasn't the same scheduled testing as in the top division.
Okay, so there is a round of tests before the third round, I presume, then?
Yeah, so and the FA are paying for that. The game board are paying, so all the 64 teams involved will be tested. And you'd have to think, given this is a series of games where clubs who have had regular testing, and in involving matches with a lot of clubs that haven't had regular testing, we could well see a jump in positive cases for those that haven't been regularly testing.
So this evening's game then, Man City against Manchester United at Old Trafford, you sort of forget City have won this tournament 5 times of the last 7. I mean, it's kind of a disposable tournament in people's memories, and you know they've won it of late, but 5 of the last 7 is quite extraordinary. They're an interesting case just now after what we saw at Stamford Bridge, and I was asking the lads even in the newsroom before you came on, are we going to look back at Stamford Bridge as the moment when City got their act together and kicked on in a big way? Or will it just be something of a high point in an otherwise inconsistent season? I'm not sure of the answer.
No, and that's been the nature of this season, hasn't it? And I mean, you say about a statement performance, but then I thought exactly the same after Liverpool beat Spurs and then won 7-0 at Crystal Palace. I remember immediately after that game thinking, that's it, that's a title. Liverpool are going to go on a run now. So, I mean, it has been the kind of season where you'd be cautious about any prediction. And also, there is a context to City in that obviously their Monday game had been called off, so they had the extra few days break before playing Chelsea. That might be a factor. But even that's kind of instructive, I think, because when I've had to do a bit on City this season, when you talk to people around the club, ultimately there's been a few little issues or elements that have kind of been discussed that have maybe explained this, what has been a flatter season so far, certainly in comparison to even Guardiola's first season. The football at the start was much better than what we've seen this year up until that game against Chelsea. And there's a few things at play. Obviously, hanging over a lot of this is that it's Guardiola's 5th season and the first time in his career he's ever spent this long as a club. So that's almost an interesting dynamic in itself, that we've never seen him this long. And as you can see from the sideline or how he speaks, Guardiola's an intense individual, and you would wonder how long any group of players can kind of stay as sharp with that, or they naturally get fatigued by it. And a few people were talking about that at the start of the season when City were putting in flatter performances, that, you know, some of these players they could do with a mental break almost. But then on the other side, and this is naturally going to come from people closer to Guardiola and kind of some of the Catalan delegation he talked to around the club, that City actually had a specific physical conditioning approach, which was almost to kind of not rein themselves in, but it was basically training wasn't a full pelt, or physical training wasn't a full pelt, because of the nature of this season. They knew how congested it was, and because of that, they probably weren't operating at maximum physical capacity for a lot of the early months. And the plan is, again, this is what people around the club say, or people close to some of the players, the plan is that they'll be as sharp as possible then coming into when it matters most. And maybe that's what we saw on Saturday. Maybe it's, on Sunday. Maybe it's this team now kind of finding the benefit of a more constrained physical approach given this season. And we might well see the fruits of it over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because the league is there to be won this year. You know, I mean, as you said, it really did look as if Liverpool a couple of weeks ago, right before this massive slump, were about to find their groove and canter away from the rest. And equally, Manchester United are winning, but they haven't been spellbinding. I mean, deflected last-minute goals and, you know, squeaking by Villa. And these are really, you know, confidence, improving results, and there's a sense of camaraderie about the whole thing. But they haven't been spellbinding. And so, like, there is a gap in the market for a Man City to find their groove and really make hay while the others are still figuring things out. Like, unless Liverpool buy a centre-half, for instance, you know, there's no obvious end to some of their issues.
Yeah, it feels like we're basically waiting for one good team to go on a proper Alex Ferguson-style run where someone just puts the hammer down and goes, that's it. And in that sense, the season has reminded me so far, and he actually, this also correlates with kind of the figures we see in terms of point returns and defeats and wins. It's like a season out of the 1990s. Like, it reminds me of kind of 96, 97, or even a championship campaign where every, like, it feels like within the space of 3 games, and we've seen this with Liverpool, we've seen this with Arsenal, we've seen this with City, we've seen this with Chelsea, but in the space of 3 games, a team's entire complexion can change. And even along those lines, I was looking at this just before Christmas, or just after Christmas, sorry, where so far this season, the longest winning run is a mere 4 games. No one has gone a run longer than that. Everton have done it twice. They had a chance to go 5 in a row in their last game, and almost predictably with this Everton side, lost. But yeah, and that all feeds into it. I think it's just, and why it's like one of those 90s campaigns where you get into kind of the January, February period, and that's when whoever's going to win the title, which in the 90s was invariably Ferguson United, starts to kind of get serious about it. And it does feel like we're waiting for that.
Yeah. God, there's something quaint and reassuring there about the notion that the title doesn't really start till Christmas and you just have to hang around.
Well, but even that's a bit of a, like, because what we've become accustomed to basically since, I suppose, really since Jose Mourinho.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And he caught Ferguson on the hop. Ferguson realised, oh my God, I have to start like the clappers now since this guy's in town. Yeah,
that was exactly, because the Ferguson method was always make sure we're ready for January, February, and that's when we show we're champions. Whereas Mourinho came in and suddenly, Chelsea were winning like 6 or 7 in a row from the very start of the season. The pace was set, and it just completely changed the nature of English football. And this is it feels like this is the first time in a long time, or maybe since then, that it's been that bit more open, and we're going to go back to maybe the days where the back 9 of the season, if you like, are when reality asserts itself.
Yes, there's some analogy about the Masters not starting until the back 9 on Sunday that we can work in here. So of Manchester United then, City explode to life on Sunday, and we have to see how sustained that's going to be. United have sort of been creeping towards this. I mean, geez, it's not long ago since Solskjaer was under really serious pressure. They haven't been spellbinding, as I said. That goal against Wolves doesn't go in. There's a different complexion on them. The Villa game, Villa were good in that game, could have gone a different way, but they're getting over the line, and you can see it even in their body language. Getting over the line is increasing their confidence, is building a sense of rapport, even some of the on-field celebrations at full time. They're also looking like they have a few more ideas about themselves when a team is camped and parking the bus. They look a little more likely to open them up, which they didn't for a while. They felt like just a counter-attacking team for far too much of this season.
Yeah, I think when you pull back a little bit there as well, it's to Solskjaer's credit, really. I mean, they've had 2 disasters this season. They had the 6-1 defeat to Spurs, which looked like it really could be close at the end for them. And then they had the elimination against Leipzig after having started that Champions League group so well. And of course, the Champions League group, the wins in that game came after the 6-1 defeat to Spurs. But to Solskjaer's credit, every time, in a way that maybe you wouldn't have seen under other managers, they have rallied around him, they've played for him, and they've looked quite good.
There's a hesitancy when you say that.
Well, the one thing I would say about United, I think there's definitely a spirit there, and I think it's to Solskjaer's credit that he's kind of engendered this. But there isn't too many games where they're completely convincing. I mean, even all those games you referenced, not just Wolves and Villa, but also go back to the Southampton game, the West Ham game, as part of this unbeaten run. So many of them are kind of almost knife-edge games. And when United are good in individual parts, or even in individual periods of games, they can still go either way, in a way that it does feel like it has a kind of a lingering element of doubt about them. But in saying that, you can also see, as you say there, the confidence in the squad is evidently growing with this. The comfort with each other is growing. And even Solskjaer himself looks like he's getting more confident. I mean, it feels like he kind of backs himself with decisions more. Like even against Villa the other night, when he took off Bruno for James to basically kind of just shore up that side of the pitch. And so a lot of that is kind of coming off from him now. The team, they do look like they're in a bit of a flow, and they go forward, and there's a connection with each other. When you do talk to people around United, and I think this is still true for some of their senior players, they do have some, not doubts, but they would compare Solskjaer unfavourably to maybe some top coaches in terms of kind of the way United train and his attacking ideas. And maybe when they have another kind of drop off, that will come again. That's when these sort of problems expose themselves, because it's always the case with these sort of teams. When you have brilliant attackers like United do, they're all on form and in confidence. They tend to look pretty good. It's when there's a roadblock that you see a few issues.
Yeah, I've heard some of these mumblings about training being a bit basic in the eyes of some players of late. I mean, it's always hard to know who's saying that and what their agenda is and how true it is. I mean, Solskjaer with his notebook every day under Sir Alex, is he still just whipping out the old notebook and doing the same training? I doubt it. It's hard to know where the truth lies in that claim.
Yeah, well, and the other side of that is it could actually serve them this season as well, because I mean, obviously, as we've been talking about there, it's been a more unpredictable season than ever, and I think there are a few factors that obviously the calendar, the effect of fatigue, the transfer market, meaning clubs can overhaul, but also there basically isn't enough time to train. And a feature the last few years, and arguably one of the most dominant features in football, has been these super coaches like Klopp, Guardiola, basically drilling their teams to these supreme degrees and basically using their time to coach teams and have them prepared in a way that was really has never been seen for most of football's history. Like, football has taken a real evolution in that regard in the last decade in terms of how well prepared it is and how tactical it's become. And maybe in a season like this, where there is less time to train. I mean, I don't write off Solskjaer as a vibes manager in that regard, but maybe when maybe his approach might actually suit the rigours of this season a little bit better.
Very last one, because the game has started. I'm sure you're very keen to watch it. On Liverpool and their centre-half situation, so Fabinho with Henderson, Phillips, Matip, Reece Williams, they're, I mean, chopping and changing in a way that is just not good for the team. Is Klopp going to the board and saying, if you buy me a centre-half, I'll pretty much guarantee you the league? Where's their head at, do we know?
He does want one, but at the moment, all the talk is that they may not move and they might persist with basically trying to adapt to this situation. Because I suppose, I mean, Liverpool they're quite a far-sighted club in this way. And I suppose one of the issues that they could buy a centre-half now, and then they might have problems in future because they don't really need one once they have a full complement. But then again, I mean, we've seen this previously. We saw this in the summer where the murmurs were they weren't going to sign anyone and it might be a barren summer. And then they went and signed Jota and Thiago.
Yeah.
So we might well see the same again, especially if they have a few more setbacks.
OK, listen, of the London Independent, Miguel Delaney. Enjoy the game, Miguel. Thanks a mil.
Cheers, Joe. See you later.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power.